All right, so we have the situation where we have a proposed emperor to the Roman Republic, whereas once it was ruled by a semi-democratic Senate. Now all of a sudden Caesar Augustus wants to become the all-powerful emperor, but he can't just simply do it by force. He has to be able to convince and to show and to demonstrate that he is different, and that he is also worthy to become emperor in a place that traditionally have not liked emperors. So hopefully what you've done at this point, and if you haven't already done so, pause the video here and go and answer the questions to the primary documents regarding Caesar Augustus, and answer it to the best of your ability. All right. Once you've done so, we can go ahead and continue to take a look at, in the end, how and continue on the quest to try to look at Rome's history as sort of its roots of why the empire itself developed. And so as you're doing so, please do make sure you fill out this graphic organizer here, the lecture discussion section right here. All right. So with that, where we left off is now the rise of Caesar Augustus as Emperor of Rome. And he wins out, and eventually people start to accept this. The notion that the Senate itself has been weakened. It's no longer the one in power, but it is an emperor. Now, some emperors who succeeded Augustus Caesar were good, others were terrible. But the good emperors and others will outweigh the negatives, and in the end will create a society that is going to unify all of these various regions, about 5 million square miles, all across the European, Asian, and African continents as well. And in order to do so, what they generated is what is known as the Pax Romana, or the Peace of Rome. Now, a place you can pause and to be able to discuss this with someone else is to take a look at the reasons and the consequences for a centralized government. When you actually have an empire this big, it's going to bring a lot of positives. So, and think about it. Take a look at the images that are provided on screen here, and to take a and think about and brainstorm some of the good things that come about when you have a government that is creating an empire of massive size as well. So something to really examine and look at as well. Eventually, you're going to see the birth of Christianity within the rule of Caesar Augustus, this offshoot of Judaism, which a group of people that was persecuted initially, but eventually will become the core faith in the Roman Empire. And so all these characteristics is going to help to define the history of Rome and why it came to be as an empire. We want to shift gears real quick and to take a look at the roots of the Han Dynasty. And it goes back to some of the early dynasties of the past. The first two, the Shang and the Zhou, both of which were relatively decentralized kingdoms, meaning that there were a lot of regional lords and regional authorities that gave nominal approval of an overarching emperor. However, that period, particularly the Zhou, ends, and it ends in war between the various localities and regions within China. Just like we see in a divided Europe, there's a divided China as well. And this is the time period where the root philosophies and faith of Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism will take root. But legalism particularly was adopted by one of the warlords from the West, a man who eventually will be known as Shi Huangdi, and the leader of the Qin dynasty. This particular region will eventually conquer the rest, and they're going to start to implement a system that is much more centralized, much more powerful, and brutal than we've seen before here, and based upon the roots of legalism. And so economically, there are major changes. One that China is going to have for generations is the existence of merchants that in the end are going to be highly legislated, regulated, and taxed as well. And secondly, there will be use of state monopolies, which I'll get to later on, and the standardization not just of measures, but of coins to make the economy much more effective. And one strategy that's going to be used by the Qin is to take the lands of the large landholders, many of the aristocrats that would be defeated in battle, and as a result of this, they're going to give this land and pass this land on to independent farmers. And that's going to create a strong agricultural base and tax base for the Qin to be able to do what it needs to politically in expansion. And as it does so, it's going to move to change the political structure of the region. One is the elimination of the landlords. Two is the noble and the aristocracy will either be weakened, they'll be replaced, or those who are too powerful or have struck deals with the Qin, many will be forced to live near the capital. And the reasoning for that is, again, you've probably heard the phrase, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, right? That way you can keep an eye on their actions. They're not causing trouble in the homeland as well. There's the appointment of loyal regional governors, and who are in the end loyal to the Qin government, and the implementation of harsh laws. And here's where that legalism piece comes into play. You want law and you want order, and you can prevent people from doing things or force them to do things with really harsh laws. For instance, if, let's say, for example, you set a fire in your house to cook food and others, and there's usually ashes, people will dump them out of their house and onto the street. If that was the case and you were be caught, you would actually get one of your appendages amputated, and that itself is a harsh punishment for something so light. And so if that's the case for something as little as dumping trash, imagine more serious things like treason or theft or other things that might destabilize a society. The Qin also utilized conscription as well of men in families, and also because Shi Huangdi was one of those charismatic individuals who really cared about power and status. He ended up calling for book burning of any instances or written instances of any Chinese emperor from the past, so that he could be seen as the first emperor of China. And then there's also major social changes. Now, if you can imagine China as dozens and dozens of different states, right? And his aim is to create the great state of the Qin. One way to unify all of these different people is to generate a common script. And you could probably speak different dialects, but if you're reading the script itself, the words themselves are actually the same. So spoken, it may sound different, but in terms of meaning, they remain the same on paper. And so this becomes a common script that many different groups will start to adapt on their own. And so the idea of a unified China starts to come to light through this time period. But Shi Huangdi, if you're looking at the background here, was a man who made a lot of enemies. And so those terracotta soldiers you see in the background, he believed that he would have to fight in the afterlife against all the enemies that he'd made. And so he commissioned thousands of these soldiers and chariots and warriors and horses to join him in the afterlife to fight. And so that's the kind of man he was. Vindictive, full of force, charismatic. And when he passed, his empire also passed very quickly as well. It moved to his son, and then from there was a rebellion under a peasant leader by the name of Liu Bang. And he and others are going to implement what is known as the Han Dynasty, and it's going to reach its height under the Emperor Wu Ti and last for 100 of years in two different phases. But we can describe how this new dynasty was able to unify such a vast land, and particularly is done through a common identity. The notion of China, or a middle kingdom, is developed at this point, that China itself would be a bastion of civilized light, an island of light in a sea and an ocean of barbarians. And that identity is going to cross through many boundaries and many borders that had existed in the past. Not only that, but when the Han take over, they start to generate a system that will implement the rule of law and order that comes from Shi Huangdi's legalism, but they're going to soften it up a little bit. And not only that, but they're going to be less persecuting. And so they're going to allow for some form of religious and philosophical freedom. They're going to allow the Taoists to try to continue their faith. However, they're going to ask that their version of Wu Wei, right, the notion that of leading towards inaction, they're going to say, look, don't be inactive, just do what we ask you to do, but in a robotic sense. So the Taoist Wu Wei becomes more of a robotic obedience. So you're doing things as you're told, but you're not really thinking about it. This is what you're just simply to do. Not only that, but the type of governance is going to implement the type of hierarchy that we find in Confucianism as well. The notion of respect within the family and respect of authority, it means that there's a clear hierarchy with the emperor as the head head of the family that would become China, and he has been granted the mandate to rule. And then from there, the emperor will utilize two different key groups here. One is the commanderies, which are basically local governors who are loyal to the Han, and just in case, they're oftentimes rotated from region to region so that they don't ever create a loyal local base that they could end up rebelling from. And so the governors or the commanders will end up rotating from region to region. But what I've always called the secret sauce of Chinese governance is in the scholar gentry. You need a bureaucracy to issue out and to run the laws that you issue, the ideas that help you in terms of policy and planning and so forth. And look, you could find relatives of key families, but they might not actually be effective. The most effective way is to find people who can actually do the task. And in doing so, they're going to call for the most educated, the brightest from the country. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to come from the aristocracy or from the elite, but if you can show talent, and particularly through the examination system, learning Confucian classics, demonstrating your ability to understand those pieces of work, and you're tested on it, and then from there you're given government positions starting off at the regional level and then eventually to the national government based on your ability to act. And in fact, Wu Di ended up not just establishing the civil service exams, but also training these bureaucrats to become better in their roles through a university known as the Imperial Academy. To make it all happen, you need the invention of ink and paper so that people can actually read and study. So this becomes one of the most literate societies in the world at the time period, and they are working for the state. And so you have an effective government that is in the end loyal to China as a whole. And all of this is secured by the sense of legitimacy that comes from the mandate of heaven, this social contract between the rule and the ruler, right? This poem here really demonstrates what the mandate of heaven is like, right? The prince is the boat, the king is the boat in this case. The common people are the water. The water can support the boat or the water can capsize the boat, right? A social contract. And not only that, but there's greater support for this emperor, as well as many of the imperial family will become the new nobility and aristocracy in Han China. To add to this, as Han China expands further out, there are oftentimes regions that are a little bit farther than the central capitals. And so as a result of this, there are autonomous regions that are created. In other words, some regions may have more independence from the central government because they're just farther away. And oftentimes, especially if they're culturally different, they're able to keep their cultures and customs, and they're more willing to remain within your government as a result of that. To add to this, there is the creation of some form of economic control. We talked about standardization of currency and others, but then there's also the use of state monopolies over key items like salt, again, used for food, used for preservation, used for things like chemical reactions to help with mining and so forth. And then there's also iron, which are used on one hand for farming implements. So in other words, if you want to succeed on your farm, loyal to the government to get your plows and so forth. And not only, and importantly, weaponry, spears, swords. The government will possess the ability to create these items here. And so that's going to solidify China as one powerful force where more and more people are going to see themselves as a part of this identity and region. So with that, we're going to go ahead and in the next section take a look at the same process of unifying the Roman Empire. And we're going to start by examining a primary source from the Christian New Testament. So you're going to read the book of Acts, chapter 16, answer the questions that are there, and we're going to continue with the last part after this.